Okay. So, good morning. How's
Good
everybody?
morning.
As you can tell, we have a small group, which has worked well in that we can be able to share with one another, because this session is built completely on you and our conversation together. And so in hopes that we can learn from one another. And I would love to start to begin with today. I'm going to share my screen. It's for us just to introduce ourselves. My guess is that not everybody knows one another. So how about we start there? I can't tell where you guys are, so you just jump in whenever you want to. That'd be great. And when I say introduce ourselves, just tell us where you're located, who you are, where you serve, your layperson, clergy, kind of just anything you want to tell us about yourself.
All right, well, I'll jump in. Get us started.
Exactly.
Ashley Thomas, clergy, elder in Western North Carolina, part of Clergy Couple. My husband is driving the car right now. And and we are in Charlotte, very North Charlotte. So Charlotte/Huntersville, because Charlotte's a big area. I am officially appointed to Extension Ministry, and that is with Passion and Partnership and with a spiritual formation contemplative retreat ministry called School of the Spirit, with this direct form out of Statesville, North Carolina. And my husband works for the foundation.
Hey, AJ. I don't know if you can hear me, but good morning.
He can. I got the earbuds on.
Oh, okay. I can't see you.
So
Okay.
he doesn't get any of the dish of what we're talking about.
Oh, well, that would have been a good thing. Absolutely.
You can see him. He's driving.
Hey, AJ.
So just mention his name occasionally as if we're talking about him.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Let me put Regina where she needs to be real quick.
Good morning. Thank you.
Well, I'll go ahead and jump in. I'm Kevin Burden. I'm in the Louisville area of Kentucky. I serve at the conference. I'm clergy. I'm the assistant to the bishop and director of ministerial services for the conference.
Thank you.
And I'm Tam Wenzel. I'm in Concord, North Carolina, and I serve as pastor at Rocky Ridge United Methodist Church.
Bruce Miller, live in Avon, North Carolina on Hatteras Island out on the coast. And I'm a CPA and a coach. I went through the coach training with Kevin, and that was a great experience. I'm also a certified lay minister, and I preach occasionally in church, and I lead the music every week in church. And my wife's the pastor of the church here, St. John United Methodist Church.
Bruce is my favorite certified.
It froze up. I didn't hear what you said.
I said you're my favorite CPA and certified lay minister on Hatteras Island.
All right, thank you.
Well, let me just invite you to help me to think about what you would hope for in this session. What are the things that, when you said I want to be part of that particular group, you were thinking about? What would be helpful today? We'll see if we can get to most of them or all of them.
Well, I don't remember what I signed up for. So what's this session?
That's a really good question. This particular session is spiritual disciplines as a foundation for resilient ministry.
Gotcha.
So, man, that was trusting for you just to say, I don't know where I am. I just know I'm a church.
Button on the sheet.
So, what were you hoping for today, folks?
Well, spiritual disciplines undergird everything else we do. So it's a critical thing that we need learn and put into practice, and hopefully over time put into practice unconsciously and live that way.
Okay.
And especially during this time, I've been trying to teach different spiritual disciplines to the congregation to just, one doesn't fit all, and have something to help them during the pandemic times and forward in their lives.
That's great. Thank you, Sam.
Where I am right now, I've come to a conviction that
Kentucky's freezing this morning. Well, maybe can everybody else hear me okay? I'm not frozen, am I?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So, well, hopefully he'll get back in here in just a second. What other things were you hoping for today?
I think for me, spiritual disciplines and spiritual formation, that's my jam. So I'm here because this is always my favorite. This is always my favorite conversation to be a part of. Yeah.
that may not have been a good sign that I get knocked off as I'm.
Well, we're gonna. You said you were about to say something, Kevin, and we stopped you, or I didn't stop you, but somebody did. Yeah.
That's been a dream of many a congregation.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm where I am in my life and ministry. I've come to a conviction that clergy are prepared well for the external of leading, but not so much the internal. In that the spirituality is assumed instead of taught. Particularly, well, from my experience, particularly in the Protestant tradition. And so I'm reinvesting my life. Contemplation and such has always been a big part of who I am. However, I'm taking a new step as starting training as a spiritual director in January. And wondering, and my dream is, this is much more than you asked for. I'm sorry, Trish. My dream is,
you're good.
What would it well, and dadgummit, Ashley mentioned this yesterday, the connection of emotional intelligence to spiritual maturity. And I think we're neglecting the spiritual formation of our residents. Therefore, what would it be like to have a spiritual director for each resident? That was much more than you asked for, but that's where my brain's been really churning, is in these two topics.
And I think that you guys have hit, no, I appreciate all of your comments. I think this is really, my hope for our time together today is that we think about spiritual disciplines in two different ways. One, where we are in spiritual disciplines, and just to invite you to share as you will, kind of what you're learning, what God's teaching you in spiritual disciplines, where we struggle together. I know I struggle. I met with my spiritual director on, let's see, what's today? Today's Friday. So it must have been Tuesday morning, I guess. I met with him Wednesday morning. And I said, right now in my place and the way I'm feeling on the inside, I think it's pretty funny that I'm leading this particular, group, which is usually the case. So I come to you as a person who struggles, as I know maybe you might struggle at different times. So my hope is that we'll think about it in terms of our own spirituality, but also in terms of what questions might we invite our coachees to ponder as they think about spiritual disciplines. Not so much, I'm very conscious of not wanting to be the spiritual disciplines police. to say, why are you not doing that? How could you not think about praying about this? Because that's not always the first thing somebody says when I invite them to think. So I don't want to think of it from that standpoint, but what would be helpful to our coachees as we ponder spiritual disciplines? Anything else that you were hoping for? Well,
I just echo some of just what Kevin was saying and what you're saying, Trish, of just there is I just kind of grieve that we're given this power and this wisdom and that's truly available to us at any point in time, and we're just not accessing it. Mm-hmm. And spiritual disciplines it's the doorway. Prayer is the doorway to access wisdom and power. Anyway.
Someone else just came in the doorway. Chris, hey there. What group would you like me to put you in?
Well, since you're like my favorite person, can I just stay in your group?
You don't get any extra points for saying that, but
okay.
But we're glad that you're here.
I'll mute myself then.
No. Chris, we're just sharing with one another what we would hope for in this session. So, Kevin, you were saying something as I went to Chris.
Mine was as an aside. A couple of years ago, I just got a wild hair and hosted a silent retreat for clergy in which each one was assigned a spiritual director. And none of the participants had ever done anything like that. It just underlines how the church has neglected this huge part of our tradition and our relationship.
That's why I think it's so important to teach the congregation. I took a week in July, I just need to unplug from everything, the technology and everything. And they were like, well, did you have fun? They just don't understand solitude and silence. And I think it's important for them to be taught and to learn constantly different spiritual disciplines.
Yeah, I think Kevin mentioning about pastors reminds me years ago, Curtis Campbell, our pastor, was preaching and gave us some statistics of guess what type of person this is. And there was all these different things. And they prayed 5 minutes a week and it was pastors. It was like you sat out there in the congregation and pastors pray 5 minutes a week on average. That's what the survey he had. I may not remember it exactly, but it wasn't very much. It was way, way, way below what you would expect. So I think the busyness, get caught up in the busyness and the trying to get it all done yourself. And there's no time for spiritual disciplines, what I see.
Chris, we're glad you joined us. What would you add in terms of what you would hope for in our conversation today or in our time together?
That's a great question. Probably since I just crash landed in, I think probably for me, when it comes to spiritual disciplines, I make two assumptions. I think most people, when you open the door of your heart and soul in the midst of spiritual disciplines, I'm not sure people feel equipped to deal with what's behind the door. Mm-hmm. And so implicitly, I think they avoid that. And then I think the other thing is because people have very few role models to see what a spiritually grounded life looks like. And I think partly because pastors struggle to be that for their people too. I think people don't know why and how they could actually be changed and transformed by spiritual. And so I think that's just commentary, not really more than that. But I think that's why people struggle to gain traction with spiritual disciplines, in my opinion, in my very humble opinion.
Thank you. want to just kind of share from my own kind of journey. It's 30 years ago, this fall, 30 years ago, I started divinity school. It doesn't seem possible, but it's true. I was only 12 at the time. No, not really. I was half that. I'm double that age now, just recently. So 30 years ago, I started, and I remember distinctly opening chapel, York Chapel, Duke Divinity School, going in, and the preacher for the day was a student. And I don't remember her name at all. That never stuck with me. All I remember was that she was a senior, graduating that year, and she was the preacher. And I don't remember the text, anything, just this one phrase. She said that the one who calls and sends also sustains. The one who calls and sends also sustains. And when she said that, it was like one of those light bulb moments for me. I was leaving a career as a teacher, single woman, going into ministry. I didn't have any money. I didn't, I had cashed out all my retirement from the school system to be able to go to divinity school. And I was in this place of like, okay, well, Lord, I'm here, but I don't have a clue how I'm going to do whatever it is you're calling me to do. And at the same time, I also knew that God would sustain me in that. And so that particular phrase I wrote down on my notebook, like I do, my journals, and it has stuck with me for all of these years. That one phrase, the one who calls and sends also sustained. So here I am on this level of believing that God is going to sustain me. And then I move to this next level. So yes, and this quote, which I'll read aloud, is from the homework of a pastor who is part of the coach training. He was a coach, not at any of our conferences that's represented here. And he was actually quoting another friend. So I don't know who said this, but it stuck with me. And it was this: those in ministry can suffer from the problem of working in close proximity to sacred matters all the time. Only in horseshoes do you get points for being close. Being close to the sacred does not substitute for being on and in the sacred journey with Christ. Being close to the sacred can feel enough like being on the sacred journey that you effectively keep Christ at arm's length. When I read that, I thought, wow, how true that can be of me too often. And so here you've got this sense of, I'm close to the sacred, doesn't that count, Lord? And at the same time, knowing that God sustains me. How do those two thoughts resonate with you personally right now? What kind of comes to mind for you? What have you observed with your coachees?
I'll speak.
I think what comes to mind for me is just cute that I have. And
Ashley, we're missing you. You're frozen there, I believe.
Oh, so am I real time again?
You're real time. Okay, we got you.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, yeah, I missed whatever happened there. For me, I just think of the immense gratitude that I have, that Ann Starrett crossed my path early in my ministry. So Ann Starrett leads School of the Spirit, and she's the one that taught me contemplative practices when I was like 28 years old, right? And I was in ministry with her at a church and got connected with School of the Spirit. And I just don't know I don't know where I would be. I just don't know how I would be, like, because she's the one that taught me the practices, the disciplines, to stay first and foremost a disciple of Jesus for myself. And I really am desperate for other people to have some kind of Anne Storette in their life. Like, not her exactly, but again, that piece of your saying of just, if we're going to be satisfied, it feels like grace just paved a way for me in these disciplines. And it is grace. Like, it is something that I was entitled to, that we're given. And how can we make sure other people run into them?
Yeah. Right.
Can I speak for a second, Trish, or do you need to?
Yes, and while you're speaking, I'm listening, but Pete, I'm going to put you in Peg's room, okay?
Thank you.
It was great seeing you, Pete.
Good seeing you.
I think one of the things I've noticed, probably more in me and in some of the coaches that I work with, back in the 90s and the early 2000s, pastors would go to workshops and conferences, see what other churches would do, and then come back and try to duplicate the exact same things in their churches to get the results that they saw the churches go through. And I'm curious if the temptation was that in our spiritual lives as pastors, we tried to duplicate what we saw happening in other leaders instead of doing the individual work of finding what our own individual spiritual path is. And coming from Ashley's comment about having an individual step into your life, and yours too, Trish, I think the important thing is that it's not a one size fits all. It's not going to look the same. And so you can really be on a journey in which you look like you're doing everything that you need to be doing, but that doesn't mean you're actually tapped into your individual spiritual journey. And when I've seen power in my clients or even in my fellow colleagues here, it's whenever people tap into their individual journey and grow in that space.
Thank you.
I'm grateful that the last year I was part of the Renovari Institute for Christian Spiritual Formation. It's a 2-year program, now a 3-year. And it was like it set the stage for this year. And because I was always so busy that I didn't take time for the spiritual disciplines or the rhythm of life in Christ that I needed. And this part of being of Renovari, we did a rule of life, and really the small groups helped, and we're still connected to this day, and that has helped so greatly. And I think for the coaches to be connected, to be able to talk and have someone listen to and talk about balance and spiritual disciplines is so critical.
Thank you.
Yes, so many, and speaking confessionally, I've spent a lot of time managing the sacred objects, I should say. I know to handle them. I know how to talk about them. And so much of the opportunities and workshops that I have seen are about how to sell Jesus, or to Chris's point, how this worked for us. Now this will work for you. And it has remained on the superficial side. And that's my confessional part, is that I played a role in that. But always, interesting enough, I attended the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary here in Louisville, and that's where I was first introduced to Thomas Merton and the Abbey of Gethsemane. And Merton had a relationship with this Baptist seminary, but that planted a seed in me that it just always been a hunger for more that's always hung with me. And so, that close proximity to sacred matters I can resonate with, because I've been guilty of that at times. Yet the most meaningful times I had is when I risked things such as I'm going to host a silent retreat to see if anybody comes. And they did, and we're hungry for it. That it just, well, again, back to Chris's point, that's when I felt, okay, yeah, this is it. This is the value. This is the pearl of great price that we've been looking for.
And I don't like to talk this much, but I'm going to anyway.
Good.
So I'm teaching a class right now, and I'm sorry, Bruce and Kevin got to hear some of this yesterday, but I'm teaching a class, and I'm using Janet Hagberg. So here's another book recommendation, Kevin.
Hold on, let me get my pen.
Right, yeah. So we are using it, and it's about stages of faith, and we hold that loosely. So, whatever, resources that you like for stages of faith, but we're using The Critical Journey by Janet Hagberg, and there's another author on there as well. And then also Tom Ashbrook's Mansions of the Heart, which kind of followed Teresa of Avila's, castles. So Mansions of the Heart and The Critical Journey. And especially on The Critical Journey, we're using Janet Hagberg's language because it's a little easier than using Teresa's language. So the first 3 stages of faith, the first one is just getting to know God. So that's people coming in the door, and the church is well equipped. We can put programs, we can do hospitality teams, we can have parking lot greeters to get people in the door, right? Like, we've got tools for that. And the second stage is to know God, like to learn the theology and who this God is that you've encountered. And so we've got all kinds of, you got Disciple Bible Study, you got Every Study, VBS, the church has tons of tools to throw at teaching people about God. And then the third stage from Janet's book is the productive life. So then we want to take this God that we've discovered and learned about, and we want to do something, with this faith that we now have. And we want to give back to God and to others. And so we got mission trips, and we got congregational care teams, and we go into service. We learn what our specialized gifts are, and we put them in service to the church and the community and the world. And then comes the inward journey, which is the 4th stage, the wall, which is part of the 4th stage. And that's where that's where the church sort of like loses its bag of tools. And so it's a really challenging place, and not everybody goes to stage 4. That's the other thing, is that it's such a personalized journey. It's hard to programize it. That's not a word, but I'm making it up. And it's also the case that lots of people stay in the other earlier castles or mansions and earlier stages. And like, God's actually okay with that, like, because it's all invitation. It's not something we have to, like, we are where we are. So to not hold judgment against people being in different places, but then also how to equip and help people who are getting that invitation from God to do that inward journey. I would say that pastors probably should be walking through that inward journey, have the courage and the equipping to be able to do that, so they can do that for others in the congregation. But it's just, I put all of that as backstory to say it's really hard. The inward journey in a programmatic way or a corporate way is a challenge. And that's why the church often is just focused on the first 3.
Okay. Thank you. The title of our session is to think about spiritual disciplines as the foundation for resilient ministry. And so I thought about that word foundation, and 3 scriptures came to mind, 2 scriptures about foundation and another about building. And you guys are familiar, the man who builds a house that doesn't have a foundation at all, and then the person who builds it who does have a foundation, and what happens when the storms hit. And then the other story from Matthew that talks about the type of foundation one that is a sand foundation and one that is a rock foundation. And literally being built on the rock, literal rock, or being built on the rock of Jesus. Just thinking about the difference between those two things, and it made me think about, just my own foundation of thankfully, I'm very thankful for people in my life who have helped me to build that foundation and continue to build it, like you guys. I think that's one of the things that's helpful to me, is to be in conversation with other folks who are in the journey, to be able to talk about foundation. Then the other scripture about building, other story that Jesus told in Luke 14, is about the person who started building the tower, began to build, but couldn't finish it. That story has stood out to me, because I'm thinking about, what is it like to start the journey of ministry? And when you start hitting the wall, as Ashley's talked about, then what do you do? And that whole experience and thought about, right now, so many of us, church, the clergy, people in community, everybody is like, boom, boom, I'm hitting the wall. I'm tired of this. We say that to each other. I'm tired of COVID. I'm tired of this. And at the same time, we're here. Wanted to think about the passage from John 15 that says we have to abide in the vine. A book that's been helpful to me is one that someone gave me, The Vine Dresser's Notebook. And you guys may have seen this book before. It's just a little book that talks about what it's like to connect the spirituality of the vine in John 15. I love this passage in the Message Bible. It talks about make your home in me, to remain in me, to settle down in me, that's what Jesus calls us to, the relationship that Jesus calls us to. The person who wrote the book, Judith Satera, said that most of what we produce is simple, ordinary, and even imperceptible, like the nutrients flowing through the rest of the vine that make fruit happen. Think about ministry. How often do you see results? I mean, like really fully grown Christians that are like, oh man, those lay people, those folks, those clergy are on the journey and they're doing great. Most of the time we see these little bitty steps. We don't even see the fruit. We kind of plant it, as scripture says. And the seed, the plant, we plant the seed, and the fruit is down the road. How do those scriptures speak to you, either from foundation or the vine, or whatever way you want to think about that?
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
I've somehow manipulated my screen, so I don't have any control. So it's kind of weird. Some of the things that struck me, one of the things that came up about that, and I think it's related, but not directly. So a long time ago, somebody had talked about, kind of the stages of a church, and most churches grow in their life cycle in the young part, when they're kind of an adolescent, and you think about that adolescent spirituality. Things are really clear, your identity, your ego, this is what that all looks like, and it fits. And as individuals, we kind of have to grow out of that. I think one of the struggles that I see with people in churches and leadership and the spirituality of that is that churches, and you need that sense of identity and clarity and places. The struggle is because that's where the predominant of the church culture is. It doesn't, as a church culture, the church culture doesn't grow or mature in the same way as the individual leader does. And so where I see most pastors struggle is they're ready to mature past the maturity of their organization. And so back to Ashley's point about, so I think most pastors want to do the deeper walk. I think the harder part is either one, they don't recognize the disparity. And so as they've developed in some way spiritually more than their church has as a congregation, they don't know how to walk alongside their church and pastor as they grow deeper and the church as an organization still remains in that kind of adolescent spirituality. Does that make sense? So foundationally, it's kind of, you kind of move past the needs that you had and that your church is still there, but how do you deepen your walk? And then how do you walk alongside a congregation that may never match you in that spiritual growth? Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry, that just kind of rose up for me. So that may or may not be helpful.
Thank you, it's helpful.
It's been helpful to me in my journey to know we're all beginners, because I do have that ego of, okay, what stage am I at? Where am I? What stage? Am I? And Merton told one of his novitiate, that's none of your dang business. What stage you are, quit worrying about that. And that's been helpful to me. And what Chris was referring to is being able to accept that, but also accept people where they are. In that frustration of, come on, church. Very quickly, I had a pastor one time when I was superintendent say, I just want to be pointed to a healthy church. And I told him, I said, if I knew where that was, I'd be there.
Yeah.
Of accepting that kind of tension and struggle. But that we're all still building the foundations, and it's a constant work, and it's still building the house. It's helpful to me to know that those that I really look up to, they're just beginners too. And I'll stop there. But yeah.
Looking at the foundation and the vine, you can see it's a corporate effort. You don't build a foundation by yourself. And in the vine, we're all made up of the branches, but it's an inward journey. So you have to combine those two things. My best example is Emmaus. I've been on 17 Emmaus walks. And the prayer that undergirds that, and the prayer for each other. And it's a very spiritual thing. The accountability group, the Emmaus reunion group you have afterwards, is a way to keep you going that way. Because the question is, your closest moment to Christ. Where have you seen that this week? So if you know you're going to be talking about that next Wednesday at 8 in, kind of makes you mindful. As you're walking down the street or encountering with people, you're excited about finding that closest moment to Christ. And then there's discipleship and discipleship denied. And most often for me, my discipleship denied would be followed by my closest moment to Christ, where the Holy Spirit, not condemning, but reconciling me back to what it is and what it should be, and bringing me closer to God. So if you can get people that are vulnerable and can do that sort of thing together, it's great. Here at church, we send a lot of people to Emmaus. They're all deeply spiritual, more church leaders, head of the church council now, doing all kinds of mission and things. But it's hard to have an accountability group and be the pastor and the pastor's husband and talk about church. So we need another group, where you can. So we don't have that total releasing place to where you can, but it changed our lives. We 5 years we were in a group, and 3 people out of that Emmaus reunion group became pastors. And, it was a deeply spiritual thing every week. And individually, you were conscious of it during the week. And then when you got together, people were willing to share. And, with your coaching and everything else, the deeper that you get, the more the results are, the more that God's in the middle of it.
Thank you.
That reminds me of a story that Eugene Peterson tells about building a house and how everybody came by and told them, the builder, that gave their own critique. And finally someone came in and rolled up the sleeves and got in there and started working with them and with him. And then it wasn't perfect, but they did it together and built this fine house.
That's a good story.
I can't get away from the rays of the sun. Don't
I
want
love
to,
it. It's like, you're the light.
You have a halo. You're good, Tam. It's fine.
It keeps on following me.
Yeah. I think that'll preach in some formal fashion. Yeah.
The holy was breaking through.
What we're talking about is what young adults say they're hungry for.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to use that as a sales technique, but survey after survey says, how many people consider themselves spiritual but not religious? To me, that's screaming out we're hungry for something deeper.
I had a young man tell me just recently, who I've known since he was, 5 or 6 years old. He's one of our son's closest friends. And I was talking to him about, he just got married in the premarital counseling. I said something about faith. And he said, well, Miss Trish, I don't think my journey right now is, I'm just more about being spiritual. And I thought, yeah, I hear you. I mean, that's exactly, this is a young man who has grown up, went to Christian school, has grown up through the church, has done all this, but now he's at this place of like, I just want to understand what it means to be spiritual. And so it becomes something that's very different. Along this line, I want us to think about this liminal season that we find ourselves in right now. A book that several of you have heard me mention before is Susan Beaumont's book, How to Lead When You Don't Know Where You're Going, Leading in a Liminal Season. And she describes at the very beginning of the book what liminality is. This is her definition. It's the evolving state of an individual, a place, an organization, or an institution. Anything stuck in the neutral space between an ending and a new beginning. And she goes on to talk about that liminal space is that place, it's a threshold between an ending and a new beginning, that place that can be challenging or disorienting or unsettling. And as our human response is that we want to resist it. We either want to do one of two things. That is, either we want to go back to what we used to know, the familiar, or we want to just move on and let's just get out of this space of where we don't know, move forward to something new. So we can look at liminal space that way, or we can look at liminal space as being an exciting and innovative place. Richard Rohr calls it God's waiting room. And I often experience that liminal space as God's up to something stirring within me, but I'm not really sure what it is. That was true when I shifted from local church ministry to extension ministry to coaching full time. But now we've kind of found ourselves in this place as a church, as a people, and our coachees in this place of let's get back in the church, or let's just return to normal. I just wish it used to be like it was 30 years ago. This church was thriving. I hear that frequently. I heard it several times yesterday from some of my coachees. What do you find for yourself right now in terms of where do you find yourself in this liminal space, and where do you find your coachees? What is that? How do you experience that liminal season that we're in?
I have the coaches I work with is two. Both have just moved this last summer. So in some sense, they're in the waiting room to the power of two. That have that liminal space of just getting to a new location and getting to know people, but then that's layered over with pandemic, racial tensions, etc. And so what I hear a lot is their engines are running, they're ready to go somewhere, but can't or don't know what direction to go in the midst of that.
Thank you.
For me, I feel like almost all the situations of the coachees I have are different, totally different. So one is loving having to be innovative and that they can't do things the same way they've always done them before. And that's not something that they have to implement, right? Because they love innovation and adaptation. And now the world has forced that. And so their church can be mad at other circumstances and not at them for creating the innovation and adaptation. But they feel kind of also stuck in the sense that they see it as an opportunity and the church is just wanting to get back to their previous normal. And so they're just on a different page because they're like, oh, what new thing could be out of this? And their church is like, when do we get back to the old thing we had? So that's one person who's off the page. Another feels like they're just trying to hold things until this passes. And they and the church want to do that. They just want to care for each other through this crisis and then figure things out then. So they've hit the pause button in so many ways out of a pastoral care place. And then others are taking the opportunity to go ahead and plan right now, do their development plans for what's going to be when this is over. So they're creating their teams right now who are going to be ready to hit the ground when we can be in person again. And so there's just such different approaches that are happening with all of my clients. It's definitely not a one size. And one of the things I love about that is I have to really listen because they know their context and to pay attention to what their gift sets are, that it's not a one size fits all, it's going to be different for each of them.
Right. Thank you.
My coachee, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go right ahead.
My coachee had some personal crises in the midst of the year, and I think really trying to find who she is and lead the church, and the churches have really stepped up to the plate and out into the community, and I think she's trying to see where she fits in all of that and lead as well. And I think for myself, I found myself having panic attacks in the midst of it, and so that's why I had to unplug from everything just to take care of myself and get that, go back to the roots and the vine, because that's where I needed the care and the help.
Thank you. Kevin, what were you going to think you were going to mention something?
It just occurred to me. I work with those who are applying for commissioning as clergy, and so many questions of how do we do this, how do we do that, how do we do a Bible study, how are you going to judge? And it's like, well, you have to. My smart inside in my head response is, well, you do like every other pastor is doing right now. You adjust. But what it just dawned on me, what it is they're in that waiting room. And not knowing exactly how things unfold, and we're not comfortable with we don't have our standard structures and anchors of how things are done, and therefore that's another kind of waiting room of just not knowing.
I also felt like a wilderness, and if you go back and look at the story of Moses and everything, and how, that he's here and he's going to bring us out. It's just, how do we find life in that wilderness?
I guess the part right for me is it's both and I think this is where some of my clients are, is that this isn't really a waiting room. This is life. This is like, while I may feel like we're waiting, we're building life in this moment. And I think the tension within me is to hold those two things together. That time isn't stopping. Like, life is still moving. We're not waiting. We're holding in anticipation, but we're also in the midst of doing too. And I think with my clients or my coachees, that's the part, right? Is to hold that, because some want to keep doing and move kind of past the reflection, or move faster than the reflection can hold. And some people are kind of caught and slowed down. And so they're reflecting and kind of holding space in tension while the doing is not catching up to that. So in my mind, the spirituality of the moment is both anticipation and engagement, that we're building the plane while we're flying it. And so I struggle, for me, and maybe that's me, I don't want to project too much, is that we're really not waiting. This really is the moment. The only thing we have is now. So how is all of that converging and coalescing and conspiring in the spirit? So I feel like that's a mess, but that's probably where I am right now.
Y'all are helping me so much, because I've, in preparation for devotion, I've been looking at the Jeremiah passages that are brought up in our articles, and how the people in exile were not doing anything. I mean, in that image of that, and to your point, Chris, Jeremiah's first message is no, you keep on living. There's things to do. This is not a sit and wait. Life keeps moving. So keep living your life in the midst of exile.
That really hits. Go ahead, Ashley.
One of the like spiritual metaphors that I've used because I do think this is a wall moment, and I mean, that's just my language. I've done retreats on it and been teaching on it, so I keep using it again because it's my terms. That's all. But tying to that Jeremiah passage, that God does knit us together wonderfully in our mother's wombs. So God knits us together. And one of the metaphors I have is that as life goes on, other threads get woven into what God originally knitted together. Our life circumstances, our family of origin, the opportunities or the disadvantages that, we have, get woven in as different threads. The choices we make out of free will, good and bad, get woven in. And at some point, it just gets into a tangled, knotted mess. And you get to this point where I call it the great unraveling has to take place. Like, you need to pull these threads back apart. And instead of being freaked out by that, if we can give our people, our coachees, as well as our churches, the ability to recognize that God will knit us back together again. But we have to kind of relinquish and surrender to allow God to re-knit us back together, to allow the great unraveling to take place, to allow God to decide which threads, because there are some threads we're holding on to as security blankets that really aren't necessary for the entire picture. And then there are other pieces we want to dismiss that God says, no, that's really important. And so to let God re-knit us back together, and that hope, to hold on to that hope that God can and does re-knit us even after we've unraveled.
Was Ashley speaking in tongues there for a moment, or is that just me?
Yeah, just for a bit there she was. I was thinking about this, and Chris was with me in leading a B. Eli group of pastors that started in January in this course, in this thought about leadership and the practice of spiritual disciplines. And we used this book that sort of the basis of it was Strengthening the Soul of Leadership by Ruth Haley Barton. And she uses, Tam, you just mentioned it, the example of Moses' leadership. She uses that. And she talks about rhythms of life, and she talks about a lot of the things that we've been talking about. But one of the things I found myself doing when we first started, this was pre-COVID. We started in January. And then we had about what, Chris, 2 sessions, I guess. And then all of a sudden COVID hits. And now we're in this place of like, okay, I don't have a clue what to do. And so I was looking back at my questions that I was asking them at the time. And I was asking them things like, what was your rhythm of life like prior to COVID? And how do you describe your current rhythm? And what would you hope for in the post-COVID? Because I was thinking post-COVID was going to happen about May, at least. We were going to be past all of this. Now, you guys, even this 4th question that I've added in here, people are not sensing rhythm. And at the same time, what you guys are saying, this is it. This is where we are. We got to we can't keep waiting until we get past this. We've got to continue to grow as spiritual beings in this place. One of the quotes that stood out to me from the articles that we were reading, and this was from one of those response articles on resilience, Martha Mo Keish, I'm not sure how you would pronounce that. She says, a Christian imagination fundamentally is shaped by faith in Jesus' death and resurrection, and it has a particular capacity for resilience because cross-resurrection faith necessarily recognizes the reality of wounds and refuses to let those wounds have the last word. I love that. I think that, for myself, I've experienced that in my own life with the wounds that I've felt. But right now, in this place that we find ourselves in as a church, as a people, as individuals, how do we not stay in that place? Yeah, we have to acknowledge it. This is the way I feel. I'm not saying you skip over it and you just kind of forget about it. My spiritual director said to me this week, Trish, sometimes you have to be in that place of being in the grief and experiencing the grief and experiencing whatever it is you're feeling. And then you move to that's not where you stay. When I read this the first time, I thought about Henry Nouwen's book, The Wounded Healer, of how we allow those parts of who we are to help us to move into something that's possible as Christians. Does that speak to you? Is there things that you would want to, how do we get our coachees to move to that place of seeing that possibility? It's appreciative inquiry, looking for the dreaming. What are some questions that you're asking your folks right now?
Can you repeat the question for me, Trish? I'm sorry, I had to step away.
Sure, we were just talking about how can we get our coachees or think about our coachees moving to a place of hope in the midst of the woundedness of kind of where we are now, the grief of where we are. How can we move towards the possibility? That's the faith that we have, a redemptive faith. How do we move in that direction?
One of the family stories I share about my uncle is that he had an ability to see wildlife that I couldn't see. I mean, we could be going down the highway at full speed and he'd spot a buck on the edge of the woods, and it's like, how did you do that? And even had times when he and my father would try to help me see what they saw. And one of the conclusions I said, how did he do that? How did one, he expected to see deer, and he practiced looking for them. Mm-hmm. And so I sometimes use that as an open door to say, so in the midst of the woods that you're living in, where do you see God at work? Expect to see God, practice looking for God. And then that just kind of where do you see God at work in the midst of this mess? Or in the midst of however they have categorized their luminous space.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
For me, I totally used Steve's example in our Be Like Coaches meeting, I guess last week. In the group I was in, he talked about, so whatever hardship it is a rock in your stream. I totally use that this week. It's a rock in your stream now. It's there. So how do we make sure, and talked about like how that impedes or doesn't, or how you can move around that rock in your stream. So I relied on people smarter than me to help move the conversation to a more hopeful place of like recognizing what is, but also how do we move with that reality now, just in place.
That gets to thinking about practicing paying attention, just a spiritual discipline of paying attention to what's around us, looking for those signs of hope, looking for those signs of where God is. In the Ruth Haley Barton book, she talks about that the practice of paying attention is shown in Exodus. With Moses, the reason that he heard God calling was that he stopped, he paused, he noticed, he turned aside to that. Why do you, I guess I wonder is how can we help clergy to not only think about, our coachees, not only think about it for themselves of where they're seeing God, but what kind of questions could we ask them to ask their congregations? Pam, you talked about at the very beginning that inviting your congregation to practice spiritual disciplines. That made me think of this. What would you, what comes to mind for you as you think about that?
Yeah, I was thinking too on the last question when I think their picture of what spiritual means too is bogged down sometimes. And like for my coachie, she loved to dance, and there was a spirituality in the dance, and she had stopped. And so we suggested that she dance again because it brought out a part of her that was spiritual. And I think imaging is so important for the congregation, for each one of us. What's that picture look like, and how do you live into it and the rhythm?
Thank you.
One of the things I have tried is, I certainly ask the question, where do you see God at work? But that's often focused on the external. And so then I'll say, I believe that every moment God's wanting to communicate with us. What might God be trying to say to you in that moment? What, if anything, may God be trying to teach you in that moment? It's just my attempt to get it under that, to go peel the onion a little more, go a little bit deeper and internalize it.
I think for me, the question I tend to ask is, if this is exactly the way things are supposed to be, then why? If this is exactly what needed to happen for your church, tell me why. If this is exactly what needed to happen for you and your leadership, tell me why. Tell me why this was the best thing that could have ever happened to you. I think that's a question. Because most everybody's like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, and their leadership teams, So if this is the best thing that could have ever happened to you in your church, why?
I think we can ask people what's life-giving to them, because all they're focusing on is what's life-draining. And you can get some insight there. My people, in the beginning got more spiritual with the free time and would watch other pastors on YouTube, and they would reading more books and things, but they're kind of getting stale now. It's run too long for a bit, but I've had one person quit because of health matters. Another person's retiring because of family health matters. So people are making decisions of retirement, in the middle of all this thing. And then I have churches that are building buildings, and it's ready, and they don't know when they'll open it because they can't put people in it yet. Our church just bought a house next door to us. We close on it on Monday, and when it first was offered to us, it was like, well, we can never do that. That's crazy. Well, the property value is $235,000. We asked them to sell it to us for $175,000. We raised $40,000, so all I have to get a note for is $135,000. So we've got $100,000 in equity, when we open the door. And we're going to use it for a youth and mission house, but until then we'll rent it, we've got it to use when we can use it. So, and not everybody was on board for that, but, the majority of people can still see, things moving ahead. And in thinking about all this, music is what relates to me. And there's a song by John Waller called "While I'm Waiting." And while I'm waiting, I will worship. So if we're in a liminal place, we need to be worshiping. Kind of like God's waiting room, just like Richard Rohr. What are you going to do in God's waiting room? You need to be worshiping, expectant, waiting for what might be coming next. And living in the moment. Personally, for me, since COVID hit, it was very scary at first. And then seeing friends and associates have it, and family members and that sort of thing, it really became personal, and I've tried to live each day in the moment as much as I can. Back in the old day, you were reminded more of death than you are now. The cemetery was at the church. There were a whole lot of different things that went on. Now, we cremate somebody and we have a service maybe outside, or it's not even at the church. We're trying to push death to the furthest realms, and really, we need to be reminded of it to live our fullest life, I think. Or that's what it's done for me during this time.
I have a message from God for your church. I just heard from God, and that should be an Airbnb ministry with that house. That's free to clergy. God told me to tell you that. I thought I'd pass that on.
I'm hearing that too, Kevin. I'm hearing it too.
Well, we want to have a youth mission house where youth groups come, do mission work, go to the beach, and then for like 10 weeks of the summer, we can get 2 interns to do that. So we're staffed for free. And in the shoulder seasons, we may do something like that with pastors, and the rest of the year use it for our youth and children and whatever. And we needed parking as well. We're a little village church and have 2 parking spaces. And when we have 100 in church, we topped out at 100 in our growth because there was nowhere to park anymore up and down the streets. It's exciting. I mean, I'm amazed at when this one church was building a building, and I asked them the last coaching call, so is it finished yet? She said, yeah, but we don't know when we're going to use it. They're happy. People are funding it, and nothing has stopped. It's different, and it's been choppy. Like the rock and the stream is one thing. For me in the ocean, choppy waves are more of a thing I've dealt with, and swimming against the currents. And the riptide is a beautiful way to look at this. Undertow, you get in the water and that sucks you out. If you fight it, you're dead. If you just tread water, the lateral current will take you to where there is no rip current, and you swim right in. So, that's where we're at right now. You can keep moving ahead, but you're going to have to go sideways a little here and there.
I need you to slow down. I'm writing all these down to use in the sermons. So I can't get all the metaphors. Okay. Like if we could just use one more metaphor, it would really be helpful for me. Okay.
He'll have it ready for Sunday.
Yeah. This is going to be 2020, a year of metaphor, right? Like
Yeah,
that's what
Rip currents.
there you go.
There's a sign when you go to the beach. The beach is beautiful. You can enjoy it, but it can be very dangerous, especially below the surface. I'll email you my sermon I did. It's got some really good analogies.
Thank you. I just need some help, right? Like, because you're all that
That's
out.
great. One of the things I'm kind of moved towards, I'm thinking about, because this again back to where we're thinking about coaching and how it connects to spiritual disciplines for ourselves. All of us have coaches ourselves. You know, what does that look like for us to spend time to have as Barton calls it, a safe place for our soul? That's what people need, because right now there's so much isolation. There's a lot of loneliness. For some of us who are introverts, we're okay with some of that, and at the same time I miss seeing our friends, and there's only our bubble is very small, and so we're only seeing a few people at a time. Well, not at a time, seeing a few people, period. That's it. But one of the things that I wanted just to think about for a moment is our community, is our friendships. Greg Jones said, I heard him say this a long time ago in a continuing ed, and Greg is the dean of Divinity School, that we all need holy friends that challenge the sins we've come to love, affirm the gifts we're afraid to claim, and help us dream dreams we otherwise would not dream. That there's circles of people that are connected to us that we need. And we need that individually, and also our coachees need that. I wondered how we might help ourselves, our coachees, our churches, think about community in a different kind of way, in a different light. As Christians, we are community. So what does that look like now for us? Can you build community on a Zoom call? I sure hope so.
I think we have today.
Yeah. Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, I open up my Zoom for worship a half an hour early so people can talk to each other and share, and a half an hour after. And also it's really, they've really started calling, well, throughout the whole COVID, they've called each other and emailed and sent cards and taken food to the door, that kind of thing.
Thank
Where
you.
my wife Kay serves, they encourage comments during the worship service, and so you see a lot of people greeting each other in that way. It's kind of like the Zoom version of an amen during your sermon. If somebody will respond, and even though he's encouraged those who are in attendance that are in person to also pull out their phones and connect in that way. So it's not just those that are gathered. That just fascinates me. Talking about community. Well, that's they're connecting there, and there's some who have come to the in-person worship and realized that's not what I remember. It's not like it used to be, and prefer the community on Facebook or Zoom. It's been interesting to observe. Also, the fact that we're all now going back to no in-person worship. We're seeing another wave come through the area, so we're going back to all on Facebook.
Kentucky conference is that what you said?
Yeah, as a conference, well, as a state, our governor has encouraged no gathering. He didn't say church gathering, because that got him in trouble because he was meddling then. So, but he can say, please don't have any public gathering. And that's where we are right now. So we're trying to live that into that and what that means for us as congregation.
I think for me, a lot of my coachees, relationship building is an important theme in their strengths finders. And so in different ways, they build relationships. So just finding the ways that work for them. Some of them can do phone calls or Zoom calls. Others hate making phone calls, but they love relationship building. So we just troubleshoot. What's the best way for you to connect? And what's going to be life-giving ways for you to connect with your people and help them connect with each other. And so we've just leaned into Strengths Finders on that relationship building. Some of them, I think the coaching call in and of itself is an act of hope, because in the coaching call, we are talking about like what is going to be, whether that's next week or 6 months from now in the development plan or whatever. It is an act of hope. I mean, it is a hopeful conversation, which is, I think, one of the gifts that Pip brings to the church right now, is that pastors don't have to just be stuck in day to day, because that's not what they are necessarily. They get a place to release if they are stuck in their day. There's a place of release so they can move hopefully on from that, and have a safe place to do that. But also the fact that they're dreaming, we're inviting them to dream. It's what our whole conversation is about. And so it is this act of hope that we're going to do something even in this moment. We are going to do something in this moment. And for me personally, I'll add this bit too. COVID's been one of the best gifts for holy friendships in my life right now, because when we stopped going to church, actually some of our other clergy friends and friends of AJ's and mine that moved to the area decided to do backyard church, where we do Lectio Divina and communion. And we get to do that because we're clergy, but and poor one couple is stuck with like 3 other clergy families. Those people are amazing. But it's been the most life-giving, wonderful thing. And so these friendships that wouldn't have developed otherwise, because we were all missing church, and everybody would have been too busy doing their own thing, we have created this small group that is holding each other through this experience. And it's just been, I'm so grateful for that.
Thank you. Well, I wondered if we might, in our time together, just our closing time, and I'm going to stop a little bit early, so that I can pull people back into the rooms and that kind of thing. I wonder, first of all, I just want to say thank you for your sharing and being open about what you're hearing and experiencing, and how we might be support to one another. I'm very thankful that we can have community. It's always amazing to me that we have, from Texas to Kentucky to Western North Carolina to Eastern North Carolina, really throughout, that we're able to be in a place together, even if we don't see each other. I mean, I feel close to you guys, even if I spend more time with y'all than I do my own family. And it's been, I'm very thankful for that. So let me say that first of all. I wonder, as we close up for the day, what you would take away from our phone call. Either that you believe for yourself God's saying to you, or whatever way you want to think about this. What's your takeaway today for our time together?
I think for me, I think we all choose to be coaches. And so there's something about how we see the world and want to move in the world and participate with people and walk alongside people, that when we have conversation like this, there's a connection and an energy that is unique to kind of the way we live out part of our calling. And so to be in that energy and to live in that is really good for my soul. And it allows me to talk and and think about things in ways that I don't get to do with other groups of people in the same way. So I feel some solidarity, some connection, and it feels good. It feels really good.
Thank you.
You know, I've come to the realization of a lot of serendipity, but also the realization, as our article talked about, for resilience, they need to have sites of resilience and community of resilience, and realizing that this group, the PIP, is mine. All right.
Thank you.
It's refreshing and hopeful to be together, and lots of resources named, and thanks, Bruce, for metaphors, and it's just a good time.
I think, getting together as coaches, as Chris said, is very energizing. I mean, I reflect back on when we met, in the beginning in October, and then we met in the end in May or June or whatever it was, and just how powerful those discussions were, and they are again right now. And it's very life-giving. It's not one of those things you dread you have to do. It's not on the calendar, that, oh gosh, I've got to do this today. You wake up with anticipation for what you'll hear. And it's amazing things. And the coaches are a different breed. And then people that are coached are a different breed. And, as a layperson, I have a lot of pastors that are not ordained local licensed pastors, and they're kind of like islands out there. They really don't have a lot of support, and I'd like one day to figure out how everybody can get, expand the coach base and expand the coachees to where, they can have life-giving conversations that can move them ahead in their faith. Because we all have our conversation with our supervisor every month, and what that does for us. So we're kind of on both ends of it. It's a great thing to be able to do that. But thank you for everyone's insight. It was great.
Thank you.
I think for me, one of my wild experiences was to not self-sufficient. And I have not been created to be self-sufficient, because we're made in the image of a God in perfect community, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so what I love about these times is hopefully there are some things that are worthwhile that I get to share, and always that there are things that I need to receive. And both are part of the flow, to share and to receive. And that makes my life more whole and complete.
I would just share being able to be in a setting like this, both a small group and a larger group. It is life-giving to me. I mean, that's the one thing that I have just given thanks for over and over again, is about the privilege it is, the honor it is to be able to serve with you guys and to serve in this place. Other parts of ministry in the local church were life-giving. This work is life-giving. My days don't drudge by, my days fly by. And that's when I know that I'm kind of living in the flow, so to speak. I'm doing what God has called me to do, and I'm very thankful for that. So thank you for each one of you. I'm going to close us with just inviting you, if you want to take a moment, just a break or whatever. I'm not sure if we're going to go to break when we come out of break room, our breakout rooms, or if we're going to go to what we're going to do. But let me close this in prayer, okay? Gracious God, thank you for this time that we've had together. And I thank you for my colleagues in ministry and the opportunity that we have to serve you. Speak to our hearts, speak to our minds each and every day, and hold us all close. And may we hold close to you. In your name we pray. Amen. So I'm going to stop recording.